there's, I was reading through a lot of lyrics of different Christian songs the last few weeks, kind of just seeing some themes in there. And no doubt one of the big themes is shame. And that's because a lot of people deal with shame in their life, and understandably so. I mean, all of us made plenty of mistakes, and we feel bad about it, and we're embarrassed about it, and it builds this wall between us and God, and so we're just absolutely crushed by our past mistakes. And I think of Tasha Layton when she's saying, "Look what you've done. How could you fall so far? You should be ashamed of yourself." So I was ashamed of myself. I think, that describes how a lot of people feel in their life. I think they look at that like, wow, how could I get to where I am today? And that's really a question a lot of people struggle with, is how did I get to where I am? And the answer is different for each person, but it's one decision at a time, one small compromise at a time, and before you know it, you are in the deepest valley you could have ever imagined. Like I said, the journey there for you is different than somebody else, but there's a lot of things each and every one of us can relate to on that journey. Whatever it is, we end up in that same place, that valley of despair, the shadow of death, as David refers to it in Psalm 23, and we're ready to absolutely collapse. I've thought of the lyrics by the Lifehouse in the song Broken that said, you're barely holding on by like your fingertips. And I think, that describes how a lot of people feel in that kind of moment. And then when you're going through a season like that, you show up to church, and the preacher gets up there and he says, this series is called Claiming Your Canaan, claiming God's promises for your life. And you hear me say that, and you're like, Mark, it sure doesn't feel like I'm claiming a dream from God. It feels like I'm claiming a nightmare. Promises, I'm just trying to survive today, and it feels like God is completely absent in this moment. It's in these moments where God invites you on this journey to a river. And you get to the river's edge, and it's not a river you can cross. It's not a river you want to wade into. And God invites you to take one step forward. It seems impossible. Seems ludicrous. It seems like the worst idea you could come up with. Yet you are invited by God to take one step forward. Maybe the real question is how? How do you take that one step? What does that actually look like in your life? Well, let's go back to the nation of Israel as we get into it today. We're in the book of Joshua. We're going through a series of sermons that's going to take us all the way up to the week before Easter at this particular point. And we're just kind of overviewing certain parts of the story. And what we understand is Israel is claiming God's promise for them, the promised land. But that promise has been on delay for a long time. They haven't been able to claim it near as early as they could have because they have fallen so far. They've made so many mistakes. And I just tried to think of a few of them. Like one of the mistakes they made when they were wandering in the wilderness, they said it was better to be slaves in Egypt where they sat around pots of food all day than starving in the desert. Now, I don't know about you, but I just thought that sounded kind of odd. Like really, slavery was better than freedom. And I went back and I was looking at the story in Exodus when God spoke to Moses through the burning bush. He said, I have heard the cries of my people. They have come up to heaven to me, and I'm going to respond to them. Maybe they forgot how bad it was that they were crying out to God every day to free them from their misery. They also, at one point at the base of the mountain, Mount Sinai, where God was giving Moses the 10 Commandments, it was taking too long for them, 40 days. We can't wait that long. God must be gone. Moses must be dead. We need something to worship. They melted down all their gold, made a golden calf, and worshiped it, and said it was this God who led them out of Egypt. God didn't like that very much, neither did Moses, and then they were punished for that one as well. Oh, remember when they put the 12 spies in the land of Jericho, spying it out? 2 of them, Joshua and Caleb, said, we can conquer the land because God has given it to us. 10 of them said, no, we can't do it. Joshua and Caleb said, yes, we can. The people said, let's kill them. So that didn't go over very well. They got sent to wander in the wilderness for 40 years as a result. If I was God, I'd be like, look what you've done. You big mess of people. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm washing my hands of you. I'm moving on. You're no longer my people. And we would understand. We would relate. We would be done with people like that. But not God. God is so patient. It doesn't seem like it at times, I understand. You look at his judgment in Scripture, you look at how he deals and punishes at times, like it doesn't seem very patient, but he is. Because God could have walked away and he would have been absolutely right and justified in doing it. But no, God offers an invitation to his people one more time. An invitation to take one step. The same invitation he offers each and every one of you today. So I don't know what valley you're in. I don't know what season of life you're in. Maybe life is great. Awesome. There will come a season it won't be. Maybe it has been bad and it's good right now. Awesome. Again, I don't know where you're at, but God knows. And this will either help equip you for the journey you're on or the one you may take at some point. We're going to go to Joshua. We're going to pick it up in chapter 3 here, and we're going to pick it up in verse 5. Joshua told the people, "Consecrate yourselves, for tomorrow the Lord will do amazing things among you." Consecrate yourselves, because tomorrow God's going to do some amazing things. So I'm going to encourage you today to take one step, because God is working. Now, when I hear people say things like that, God's going to do amazing things among you, take one step, you never know what God's doing, I'm always a little skeptical. I hear things like that, and it sounds like one of those almost too good to be true kind of situations. Like, oh, no, you think God is working in the way that you want him to work, and therefore God is working. You know, you won the lottery. God is working. Well, really? That's why God is working? Why is it then, according to the last statistics I read, that over half the people who win the lottery declare bankruptcy within 5 years? I thought God was working. No, it turns out you're a moron in handling your money. And so that's you working, not God in that particular moment. And so we understand God works in all situations, and he can work through our ignorance, he can work through our stupidity, and he can also work through our knowledge and our intellect. Like, those are things God can work with for sure. But I think it's important that we don't limit God working to the temporary happiness that we desire. So whether it's in money, whether it's in the job that you do, whether it's relationships you're maintaining, whether it's in your community that you're involved in, let's make sure that when we give God credit for working, that we're looking at a bigger picture than this moment right now. My temporary happiness right now. The reality is so many people, and myself included, get focused on those temporary things, and we just miss how God really is working. You know, people want God to do amazing things for them, just like he told Joshua, tomorrow I'm going to do amazing things among the people. That's what we want. But we just want it to make this life the best thing it can be right now. And God has something so much better in store. Take one step. God is working. Second thing I want you to know is take one step for others to see. We sometimes need to be the people who step out on faith to set an example for what it looks like for those around us. Let's go down now to verse 7 of Joshua chapter 3. Verse 7 says this, "And the Lord said to Joshua, today I will begin to exalt you in the eyes of all Israel, so they may know that I am with you as I was with Moses." And so right there, we begin to see, God's telling Joshua, I'm going to exalt you so people know I'm with you. God's purpose in exalting Joshua was not to make Joshua amazing. It's so that people would see that God is amazing. And this is so important in our life. When we witness God's faithfulness in our life and we testify to it, it is to bring other people to God, not to bring them to ourselves. Have you thought about it, that some people's first real encounter with God might be through you? Their first real interaction with who God is and what God is doing might be through you. So let's check that attitude at the door. How's it going? When people see you, do they say, oh, God's a crabby person who doesn't like to be nice to people? Oh, God throws a fit when he doesn't get his way because that's what you do. Or do they see someone who's kind, someone who's generous, someone who's patient, putting other people first? What do people see about God when they see you? It's time to self-evaluate. Where am I today? What steps am I taking for other people to see? I started thinking about some of the people in the Bible who took some steps. How about a prophet of God named Jonah? He was famous, was well known. Everything that he prophesied came true. Like, this guy was on it. And God says, all right, we got our next task. You're going to Nineveh to preach. Jonah says, nope, I'm going the other way. And he became fish food as a result. Not something that I would desire to be. How about Goliath? He's someone who encountered God and he cursed God. And as a result, he got a rock through his head and was executed. Or how about Judas? He was someone who encountered God, made a big mistake, and he was remorseful, and he took his own life. What steps are people seeing in your life today? Are they seeing steps of fear or steps of faith? Are they seeing steps of trust or of self-reliance? What do people see coming from you? It reminded me of a story that I heard when I was in grade school. How many of you, when your grade school teacher, the librarian, they would read you a story a couple times a week? Anybody? Just me? Okay, so there's a lot of us. All right, so the teacher would sit there with a little picture book and flip the pages and tell you the story. And I remember one story pretty well from when I was a kid. And I don't know if they still read it today. I don't even know what it's called. But I do remember it. And it's about the sun and a cloud that were having a conversation, as they tend to do. And the sun and the cloud were talking, and the wind said, you know, I'm stronger than you. This cloud, this windstorm. And the sun said, no, I'm stronger than you. And they said, well, how can we prove it? And they looked down in the park, and walking along the trail was an old man with one of those like trench coats on. And the cloud said, I know how. We'll prove it. Whoever can get the old man to take off his coat first wins. And the sun said, that's fine. Why don't you go first? So the cloud came down with a giant windstorm, and he blew against the old man. And the old man wrapped his coat around him a little bit tighter. And so the wind blew even harder. And now he buttoned it and he zipped it and he tied the little waist thing around it and he bent over, hunched over, holding that coat on with all the strength that he had. And the cloud blew the wind over and over and over and he was exhausted, had nothing left. And the sun said, well, I guess it's my turn. The sun gets out there and just starts beaming as bright as he's ever beamed before. The old man looked up, smiled. That felt really nice. But then it started getting kind of hot. So he untied the coat, unbuttoned it, unzipped it, opened it up. That felt good. The sun just kept beaming. Old man starting to sweat. Started to droop the coat off him, and eventually he takes off the coat. And the sun wins. And I just wonder in our own lives, how are we presenting God? Are we this windstorm that's just blowing everything and people are just shutting off to it and they're closed off? Or are we just presenting Jesus in the greatest way possible? Kind, humble, caring, compassionate, loving, patient, and people are drawn to it. I don't know about you. I don't want to be that windstorm. I want to be like the sun. What steps did Israel take? Let's go down to verse 14 here of chapter 3. So when the people broke camp to cross the Jordan, the priests carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. So Israel, like I said, had failed so much. Look what you've done. You should be ashamed. But now they are beginning to follow God. And God says, all right, we're going to cross the river. And they arrive at the Jordan River. But this is going to take a big step of faith. This is the Jordan River. Now, when you look at it, it doesn't look that impressive. It's not that wide. It doesn't look like maybe, 20 feet, 30 feet, depending on what section of the river that you're at. However, this picture is a little bit deceptive because in our text it said it was at flood stage all during harvest. And commentators and experts looked back and they've kind of done some of the mapping. And they figured that this river would be over 10 feet deep in the middle during flood stage, and it would be 100 feet wide at most places. Now, I don't know about you, but a 10 feet deep river that's 100 foot wide during flood stage would be rolling pretty fast. It would be moving pretty fast. It would be dangerous. They actually tested this back in 1854. They had a professional swimmer attempt to cross the Jordan River at flood stage, and it was impossible. Couldn't do it. So while this river might look puny to you and not seem like that big a deal, at flood stage, it's nothing but deadly. And that's exactly what Israel is facing in this moment. They have approached a massive river that's 100 feet wide. in some areas. It's over 10 feet deep. It is raging. I don't know that there were too many professional swimmers at this time in world history. You thought Goliath was big. His head's not popping up if he's touching bottom on this river, okay? It's deep. But faith steps out when all seems impossible. Faith takes a step when it doesn't seem to make sense otherwise. We need to sometimes take a step of faith, not only for our benefit, but for the benefit of others to see. In Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, Jesus says that we should be doing good works for others to see so that they may see your good deeds and glorify you. That's not what it says. So they may see your good deeds and praise your Father who is in heaven. We do good deeds not to get a pat on the back and people to give us a thumbs up. It's so that they can see God at work in our lives. Take one step because God is working. Take that step so other people can be encouraged by it. And now we get to maybe the most difficult part of the step. Take one step and wait. Wait. Waiting has not been a specialty of most of us, I would suggest. Picking it up in verse 15. Now the Jordan is at flood stage all during harvest. Yet as soon as the priests who carried the ark reached the Jordan and their feet touched the water's edge, the water from upstream stopped flowing. The water from upstream stopped flowing. And at first glance that sounds really cool, but let's keep reading here. It piled up in a heap a great distance away at a town called Adam in the vicinity of Zarethan, while the water flowing down to the sea of the Arabath, the salt sea, was completely cut off. And so you read that, and you're like, okay, no big deal. The water stopped. They walked across. No big deal. I mean, God did this before at the Red Sea. We get it. It's not that big a deal. But with a little bit of investigation, you find out that it's a much bigger deal. It said the water was cut off at the town of Adam. Now, we know exactly where they crossed the river, so we can look at the map. We understand that is 20 miles north of where they were crossing the river. So God creates this, what it appears anyway, a wall of water at the town of Adam, and the rest of the water flows down for 20 miles till it clears out for the Israelites to cross over. And so the priests step into the water, and God stops the water flow up there. But then they have to wait. They have to wait for all the water to pass by. But here's the real question. How long did it take for them to realize God was working? When God stopped that water flow, it wasn't like a drain sink, gone. Like, this took a while. If water flows at an average of 10 miles an hour, that would take 2 hours for the water to clear out. But how long before they saw the water level dropping? Before they really saw something taking place? It would be many minutes. It could be half an hour. It could be 45 minutes before they said, hey, wait a minute. The water's not on the bank like it used to be. Like, it's sinking down. It would have been a long time of standing there waiting. That's like before baseball had the pitch clock. The batter steps up to the plate. How long is it going to take for the pitcher to throw the ball? No idea. Sometimes it would take 5 seconds. Other times it would take 35 seconds. And you're like, come on, throw the ball. Let's get going. And I can imagine the priest step in the water and all the people of Israel are like, oh, what's going on? Nothing. Okay. What about now? Still nothing. Okay. How about now? Nothing. Okay, let's make lunch. Like, come on, like, what's going on here? I thought God was working. God is working. But sometimes as God works, we have to take that step of faith, and then we have to wait to see what God is actually doing. One of the hardest things God will ever call us to do is wait, especially in our culture today. We're the most impatient people. I mean, it used to be when you ordered something online, it took 6 to 8 weeks to get to your house. By the time you got it, you forgot you ordered it. And now if you can't get it overnight from Amazon, you're like, oh, come on, it can't get here any faster than that. I mean, we're just in a different world. So when God calls us to wait, we are in constant conflict with what our world is delivering to us today. How long will God ask you to wait to claim your Canaan? How long will God ask you to wait to get across that flooded river? How long will God ask you to wait for His promises for your life to become fully available? And the short answer is, I don't know. But it does go back to point one, trusting that God is working. That as long as I'm waiting, not being idle, not being inactive, but as long as I am waiting on God to reveal and move forward, then I'm in the right place to be. I got to trust that God is at work while I wait. The problem is, we're not good waiters. I'll give you an old parable from the 1700s. There was a small community on the coastal region of a country that there was a young couple that was in love, Elizabeth and William. They were engaged to be married, but right before the wedding took place, William was called to military duty. They had to get in a ship and sail to a faraway land to go to war. And they made a promise that they would wait for each other. And William was gone. And word came back that the battle was successful and the troops were returning home. But then they got another message a few weeks later that there had been a serious storm and the ship had capsized. And there were nobody knew if anybody survived or what had happened. And after a couple of years passed, Elizabeth had to give up hope. William wasn't coming home. So she found someone else in the village. They got married, had a family, and life moved on for them. But she would have been surprised to find out William had not died. See, after his boat had capsized and he got on a piece of driftwood, all of a sudden the next day he woke up, there was an island nearby where it had capsized. And this was a paradise of an island. Had all the natural resources a person could want. He could build an empire business that could ship out goods from here. It had plenty of natural food, so he got by just fine. He was on that island for 10 years before finally a passing ship happened to be close enough that he could get their attention. And he was finally able to return home after such a long absence. He found Elizabeth and found that she hadn't waited for him, which, we look at that and say, well, who can blame her? So William took his family, took all his loved ones with him. They gathered up on the ship and they sailed to the island of paradise while Elizabeth missed out. And I think of that story, and I think that's how it is with us and God, where God's like, look, I'm going to ask you to wait. I'm going to get some things ready. I'm preparing a place, Jesus said, and there's some things being prepared in this life for you right now. Just wait. But we're like, well, God, I'm tired of waiting, so I'm going to just move on and do my own thing. And then finally, God's promise is made available, but you don't get to claim it because you've moved on with your life. We can't do that anymore. We can't be people who continue to compromise God's word because we're impatient. When a farmer plants a seed in the ground, he is active and he's involved, but he's also waiting for God to take the seed that is dead and bring it to life and to sprout and develop roots and get ready to come up into the world. He's not inactive, but he is waiting on God to make something happen. So I don't know where you are today. I don't know what you're waiting on, what your struggle is, but God knows. And I'm going to ask you to go ahead and take that step and wait to see what he has in store. Do it without compromising his word, without compromising his commands, without compromising what he expects from us. And just wait and see what he can do. Finally, take one step and leave a legacy. Take one step and leave a legacy. Skipping into chapter 4, Israel crosses over. It's a miracle. They're able to continue into the promised land, get ready to face up with Jericho here. Joshua chapter 4, beginning in verse 4. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had appointed from the Israelites, one from each tribe, and said to them, go over before the ark of the Lord your God in the middle of the Jordan. Each of you is to take up a stone on his shoulder, according to the number of tribes of the Israelites, to serve as a sign among you. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? Tell them that the flow of the Jordan was cut off before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. When it crossed the Jordan, the waters of the Jordan were cut off. These stones will be a memorial to the people of Israel forever. So the Israelites did as Joshua commanded them. They took the 12 stones from the middle of the Jordan, according to the number of the tribes of the Israelites, as the Lord had told Joshua, and they carried them over with them to their camp, where they put them down. God said, I don't want you to just cross the Jordan and know I'm with you. I want your children and your children's children and future generations to know I am with you. And so I ask the question, what will people see when they see your life? What will your life stand for? What will be the first thought people have when they think about you? Will it be stuff? Will it be a collection? Will it be a good sense of humor? Will it be a hobby or an interest or travels that you did? When people think of you, what will be the first thing that comes to their mind? Will it be a love for the Andy Griffith Show. You know, I mean, I have a feel, like some days I get bothered by that in my own mind, like maybe I talk too much about them and maybe I need to turn my focus somewhere else. But when people think of me, will they think of something more? Will God be their first thought? And if not, I need to make some changes. If God's not going to be their first thought, I need to start doing something different. And so I'm going to tell you one more story as we get ready to wrap up here in just a moment. And so I'm going to go to one of my favorite hobbies, which you all know, which is wrestling. I just listened to an audiobook on the life of Shawn Michaels, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time. He wrote 2 autobiographies. The first one is on his wrestling life. The second one, though, is on his life after coming to know Jesus. And the book title is called Wrestling for My Life. And in the book, he tells the story about how he was addicted to painkillers and drugs. He'd been addicted to a very bad lifestyle. He was losing his wife and his son over it. Like, it was bad. Life was falling apart. And then he got to know Jesus. He got a personal relationship with him. He'd been out of wrestling for a while because of a back injury, and then he was given the opportunity to return to the ring. But he was coming back not as the same man who was mean, who alienated most of the locker room. Nobody liked him because he was a jerk. His words, not mine. And now he has a chance to go back and be somebody different. But if you had seen his character, he did a lot of things that we would call immoral. A lot of things God wouldn't stand for. And he told them when he came back in, these are compromises I will not make. And they said, it's fine. He said, also, when I get back in the ring, I'm not wearing the same shirts I wore before. I'm wearing my shirts that promote Jesus. Do it. Do whatever you want. And so every night he would get on TV. He would have shirts pointing to Jesus as king, that Jesus was his Savior, that he did all kinds of things to just keep pointing people to what mattered most in his life. And as the worship team joins me on stage, I want to read to you the last couple paragraphs from his book. This is the very last 2 paragraphs. He had talked about how before he was a Christian, he would come back from the ring through the curtain, and the other wrestlers would be gathered there waiting to do their matches, and he would arrogantly tell them, try to top that. Like, you can't follow that. I'm the best there is. And he just was just in their face all the time. But then it changed after he knew Jesus. Then after the match, it was back through the curtain and into the locker room, where before, cocky and out of control, I would challenge the other wrestlers to follow that. I now returned in a different way. There was no arrogant declarations or challenges. Instead, I wanted others, some of whom doubted my salvation was for real, to see a humbled man whose changed life boldly declared, follow Christ. To me, wrestling can appear so silly in comparison to what is most important in life. Yet God took this wretch of a guy, still gifted at my job but beaten up physically, forgave me of my sins, brought me back to wrestling, and lifted me higher than I thought possible. All glory is God's. When people think of your life, is your goal all glory God's? Or do you want some of the accolades? And yeah, you follow Jesus too. Jesus should not be the tacked-on statement of your life. No. He should be the absolute foundation and the first thing people think of. If not, your life is out of order, and it's time to make some changes. Take one step and leave the legacy God wants you to do, a legacy that points people to Jesus. This morning, if you need to take a step, maybe it's down front to meet me, so you can put Jesus first, where you can confess, repent, and be baptized. If you've already taken those steps, then it's time to look at the next steps, to go further down that road with Jesus. It's a journey that is not easy. It is often difficult, but it's always, always worth it. If you have a decision to make, take that step and meet me as we stand and as we sing.